Building lockdown activated. 5 armed robbers trap office workers on the 15th floor of Metropolitan Tower. Executive offices, corporate safes, hostages with access to millions in accounts and security codes. But plumber Frank doesn't hide. He grabs his pipe wrench and turns the building's water system into a weapon of war. What happens next will flood your mind with disbelief. You're about to witness what happens when the wrong criminals attack the wrong building. Frank Morrison stands in the mechanical room, watching security feeds flicker between floors. 52 years old, 11 years maintaining Metropolitan Tower's plumbing systems, the quietest tradesman in the building. The robbers have used the elevator shaft to reach the executive floor, bypassing security checkpoints. They've planned this perfectly, isolated high-value targets, multiple escape routes, minimal law enforcement response time. Frank opens his valve control panel. 35 seconds. That's all it takes to turn a skyscraper into a hydraulic weapon. First robber never expects the water fountain to explode with 300 psi pressure. Frank has modified the building's water pressure systems, turning every pipe into a potential cannon. The man is thrown against the wall by a water blast that hits like a fire hose. Frank moves through his own building like a tsunami incarnate. Every pipe, every valve, every water main mapped in his memory from 11 years of systematic maintenance and modification. Second robber tries to escape via the stairwell. Frank floods the stairs with scalding water from the building's heating system. Not hot enough to cause permanent damage, but sufficient to incapacitate anyone not wearing protective gear. Third and fourth robbers realize they're trapped in a building controlled by someone who understands hydraulic systems at an engineering level. Frank activates pressure systems that shouldn't exist in civilian buildings. Water cannons disguised as sprinkler systems. Hydraulic rams concealed in maintenance panels. Equipment that belongs in naval installations, not office buildings. Fifth robber, the leader, tries to reach the roof via the utility access. But Frank has turned the entire building into a hydraulic maze where every wrong step triggers another water-based defensive system. High-pressure steam vents, precisely controlled flooding. Even the building's decorative fountains become tactical weapons under Frank's expert manipulation. The leader finds himself face to face with a man whose understanding of water systems extends far beyond civilian plumbing. "You're not just a plumber," the leader gasps, soaked and disoriented. "You're military." Frank stands in ankle-deep water, pipe wrench in hand, surrounded by the controlled flooding he's created throughout the executive floor. "Navy Seabees," he says calmly. "Construction Battalion, underwater construction and demolition." Because Frank Morrison hadn't spent 11 years just learning civilian plumbing. He'd spent 15 years with the Navy's construction force, building and defending installations in hostile environments where water systems meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The robber realizes he's been defeated by someone who once built submarine bases and underwater fortifications. Frank activates the final system, building drainage that removes all standing water in exactly 90 seconds. Leaving 5 unconscious criminals dry but defeated. 5 armed robbers, 35 seconds. 0 permanent injuries despite enough water pressure to demolish concrete walls. Frank restores normal water pressure to the building, executive offices returning to their pristine condition, as if he just completed routine maintenance instead of hydraulic warfare. He picks up the emergency phone. "Building security, this is Frank in mechanical." 5 individuals attempted to compromise executive offices. They're secured on 15, but you might want to bring some towels. But this story didn't start 35 seconds ago. It started 17 years earlier. The day Petty Officer First Class Frank Morrison, Navy Seabees, finished his final deployment and applied for civilian plumbing certification. For 15 years, Frank had served as a construction specialist with the Navy's most challenging units. He'd built underwater installations, maintained submarine-based plumbing systems, and created hydraulic defenses for naval facilities in hostile waters. But Frank hadn't just built plumbing systems. When Seabee units needed someone who could weaponize water systems for base defense, Frank had volunteered for projects that officially never existed. He'd created water-based defensive systems from civilian plumbing, used hydraulic pressure to disable enemy equipment, built water defenses that turned entire installations into impregnable fortresses. 17 years ago, Frank had wanted peace, The satisfaction of maintaining office plumbing instead of military installations, honest work that served civilians instead of eliminated threats. Metropolitan Tower offered exactly that opportunity. For 11 years, Frank had been a perfect employee, skilled, reliable, never complained about emergency repairs or complex plumbing problems, maintained systems with precision that impressed building management who never questioned his unusual expertise. What they didn't know was that Frank had spent his first year studying every water system, every pressure point, every hydraulic possibility in the building. Old habits from a career where such knowledge meant defensive capability. Frank had built himself a civilian identity as complete as any naval installation. Until tonight. Back to the present. Police arriving at what appears to be a massive plumbing accident. Building maintenance dealing with controlled flooding. Office workers slowly understanding what happened. Building manager Sarah Chen approaches Frank as he completes his system pressure checks. "Frank," she says, surveying the sophisticated hydraulic modifications throughout the building, "what you did tonight. This isn't standard office plumbing." Frank checks water pressure readings, each measurement precise and controlled. "I protected building systems from individuals attempting to compromise our hydraulic infrastructure." This level of hydraulic weaponization. "Frank, what's your background?" For 11 years, Frank has avoided this conversation. For 11 years, he successfully separated his Navy Seabees past from his civilian plumbing present. But there's no separating them now. "Navy Seabees," he says simply. "Construction Battalion, underwater construction and hydraulic systems." The words hit the executive floor like a tidal wave. Chen stares at him. "You're telling me that for 11 years, Metropolitan Tower has had a Navy construction specialist maintaining our plumbing?" "Former construction specialist," Frank corrects. "I'm a building plumber now. I keep water systems functioning." "But what you built tonight?" Frank looks at the building where he spent 11 years learning to maintain civilian comfort instead of military fortifications, to serve office workers instead of naval operations. Some knowledge never leaves you, especially when people's safety depends on the water systems working properly. FBI agent Williams arrives to investigate what appears to be the most sophisticated hydraulic defense system ever discovered in a commercial building. The 5 robbers are identified as members of a corporate espionage ring that had been targeting high-rise office buildings to steal financial information and executive access codes. They'd researched Metropolitan Tower's security systems, elevator access, and escape routes. They'd planned for armed guards, alarm systems, and police response. They hadn't planned for encountering someone who understood both commercial plumbing and naval hydraulic engineering. "Mr. Morrison," Agent Williams says, "your modifications to this building show expertise that goes far beyond civilian plumbing work. Where did you learn to weaponize water systems?" Frank inspects executive bathroom facilities that had been briefly affected by the pressure changes, ensuring no tenant services were compromised. "In the Seabees, you learn that water systems can serve multiple purposes. They can provide comfort or provide defense. The difference is in the engineering." Young plumber Mike approaches hesitantly. He'd apprenticed under Frank for 3 years, never suspecting his supervisor's background. "Frank, how did you know exactly which pressures to use? How did you turn the whole building into a water weapon?" Frank looks at the young plumber who reminds him of himself decades ago, dedicated to plumbing work, unprepared for the reality that sometimes plumbers must fight to protect their installations. "In my previous job, I learned that protecting what you build sometimes requires using your systems defensively. The skills aren't different, the application is." 4 weeks later, Frank makes a decision that changes his career. He begins working with building security agencies, teaching them how plumbing knowledge can be used for facility defense. The work allows him to use his Seabees expertise without returning to naval deployment. He keeps his position at Metropolitan Tower, but he no longer feels the need to completely separate his Navy experience from his civilian plumbing work. Word spreads through the commercial security community. Metropolitan Tower becomes known as the most secure office building in the financial district, not just because of conventional security, but because everyone knows Frank Morrison is watching the water systems. The ghost of the mechanical room revealed himself to be something far more substantial than anyone imagined. A guardian who'd been hiding in plain sight, protecting office workers one pipe at a time. Executive tenants who work in Metropolitan Tower never forgot. They continue leasing office space specifically because they know their building is maintained by someone who understands both plumbing systems and defensive engineering. So I ask you, have you ever encountered someone whose technical expertise seemed to extend beyond their job requirements? Someone whose competence suggested training they couldn't discuss? Share their story in the comments, because sometimes the most powerful protection comes from those who've chosen civilian service but never forgotten how to defend. If this moved you, subscribe and help us honor the quiet guardians who protect our workplaces.